There is a moment just before everything changes when the world holds its breath, a pause so thin you can barely feel it, and then it breaks. Her name was Elena. At least that is what they called her before the order came down, before the men in unmarked cars began appearing outside her window, before the man she loved looked her in the eyes and said the words that would hollow her out for years to come. "I need you to disappear." She had not cried. She remembers that clearly now, how strange it felt, how her eyes stayed dry even as the world she had built, brick by brick, began to crumble. Perhaps because some part of her had always known that a man who moved through shadows could not stay in the light forever. Known that love, real love, carries a cost that is sometimes unbearable. He had come to her on a Tuesday. She remembers the day because she had been making coffee, the small domestic ritual that had anchored every morning of their life together. The percolator was still hissing when he walked in. He did not take off his coat. That was when she knew it was real. He told her that people were watching, that someone had connected threads that should never have crossed, that a name, her name, had appeared on a list somewhere in a building she would never be allowed to enter. He told her she had 48 hours. They had a daughter, barely 3 years old, with her mother's dark eyes and her father's stubborn chin, a child who did not yet know what danger meant. Who thought the world was nothing but warm rooms and bedtime stories and the particular safety of being held? Elena held her that night for so long her arms ached. She memorized the weight of her, the smell of her hair, the soft rhythm of her breathing. She told herself, "Remember this. Whatever happens next, remember this." The next morning, Elena was gone, and the world was told she was dead. A funeral was arranged, a small, private affair, the kind that leaves no questions because it leaves no room for them. He stood at the graveside in the gray November light and let people believe what they needed to believe. He wept. Whether those tears were grief or guilt or something more complicated, only he knows. But Elena was not in that grave. Elena was breathing. Elena was being turned into something else. The organization that had her, we will not name them yet because names have power and they guard theirs with extraordinary violence, had been watching her for longer than she knew. Her skills, her instincts, the particular way she read a room, read a face, read the silence between words. She was not just a woman to be hidden, she was an asset to be used. They did not ask her, they told her. And because the alternative was unthinkable, because somewhere out there her daughter was growing up without her, and the only way to one day go back was to first survive, Elena said yes. 7 years is a long time, long enough to forget the sound of your own laugh, long enough to become someone you do not recognize, long enough to build a fury so deep and so clean that it does not shake or waver or beg, it simply waits. And then, one rain-slicked evening in a city that will not be named, it stopped waiting. They say the dead do not walk, but they have never met Elena. She had crossed 3 borders in 4 days. She had burned 2 identities and buried a third in a locker at a train station whose name she had already chosen to forget. She had not slept more than 3 hours at a stretch since she left. She did not feel tired, she felt electric. The apartment was exactly as she remembered it. 3rd floor, corner unit. The kind of building that asks no questions because the people inside it have learned not to answer any. She had memorized its blueprint years ago, not because she planned this moment, but because she was the kind of person who memorized blueprints. It was who they had made her. She knocked, not because she had to. The lock was nothing to her now. She had been trained by people who considered locked doors to be politely framed suggestions. She knocked because she needed him to open it. She needed to see his face in the moment he understood. The footsteps on the other side of the door were careful, measured, the footsteps of a man who had been listening for something unwanted for a very long time. The door opened. Elena. Not a question, not a greeting, just a name, spoken with the particular devastation of someone who had made peace with loss and now found that peace taken from him. She looked at him the way you look at something you once loved, with all the tenderness and all the damage at once. You buried me. He did not deny it. He did not look away. I had to. They were watching. There is a kind of pain that does not announce itself. It does not shout or break things. It simply settles over everything, like ash, like weather. She had lived inside that pain for 7 years. Every mission completed, every border crossed, every name erased, all of it done with the knowledge that somewhere her daughter was becoming a person she had never been allowed to meet. The apartment smelled like him, like coffee and old books, and the particular dusty warmth of a space where someone lives alone and has stopped noticing. She cataloged it the way she cataloged everything now, quickly, automatically, without mercy. There was a photograph on the bookshelf, a little girl, perhaps 9 or 10, sitting at a piano, dark eyes, stubborn chin. Elena looked at it for exactly 2 seconds, then looked away. She could not afford the feeling that wanted to come, not yet. She sat down without being asked. He remained standing, old habits. They turned me into something else. She said it without drama. It was simply a fact, like a weather report, like a sentence from a manual. I have done things that cannot be undone, things they designed me for, piece by piece, year by year. And now, she paused. Outside, the sirens grew louder and then faded, that particular urban tide of emergency that no longer registered as anything but noise. Now, they want it back. He crossed his arms. She recognized the gesture. It was the one he used when he was afraid and did not want to look at. What do they want? She looked at him with 7 years of mornings woken alone, 7 years of a face she could not show the world, 7 years of becoming someone built to serve people who had bought her compliance with the life of a child she loved. Not what, who. He froze. And in the silence that followed, Elena told him everything. To understand what Elena became, you must first understand what they saw in her. She had been, before all of this, something deceptively ordinary, a linguist, a translator. She spoke 6 languages with no accent, and 2 more with enough fluency to pass. She had worked for a government contractor whose clients were never fully named in any document she was permitted to read. She had thought of herself as a professional, careful, competent, invisible in the way that useful people are allowed to be invisible. She had been wrong about the invisible part. They had been watching her for 3 years before the burial, tracking her pattern recognition, the way she could read a negotiation, not just in the words, but in the pauses, the micro-expressions, the particular timbre of a voice trying to conceal something. She had thought this was just talent, a gift, something she was born with. They thought it was something that could be sharpened. They were right. The facility was somewhere cold. She never knew the country. She had been driven there with her eyes covered, not violently, not threateningly, just a scarf tied gently, the indignity of being handled like a fragile package. She had sat in the back of the vehicle for what felt like 8 hours and counted every turn. 43 left turns, 37 right. She had noted this without knowing why. Later, she understood. They were already training her without her knowledge. The first month was assessment. They did not call it that. They called it orientation, a word that carries the suggestion of maps, of helpful people pointing you toward things. But orientation, in their language, meant being watched, being tested, being measured against criteria no one would share with her. She passed. She passed everything. What followed over the next 6 years can only be described as a systematic reconstruction of a human being, not a destruction. They were very careful about that. They needed her functional, adaptable.
They needed her to be able to sit across a dinner table and smile and make small talk, and then, when required, do something irreversible. She learned to fight. Not the showy, acrobatic kind, the quiet, efficient kind that ends things before they begin. She learned to disappear in plain sight. She learned to build a face that said nothing. She learned, most terrifyingly, to stop flinching. But they could not take everything. They could not take the image of a 3-year-old girl with dark eyes and a stubborn chin, asleep in a room with yellow curtains. They tried. Not cruelly, they were professionals, not monsters, and there is a difference, even if the line is thinner than comfort allows. But they tried. Sleep deprivation, isolation, constant redirection. The sustained message that the woman she had been was gone, and what remained was only what they needed her to be. It almost worked. Almost. There was a handler, a woman, older, who sometimes, in moments that may or may not have been accidents, left a photograph on the desk where Elena was debriefed. Always the same photograph, a child at a piano. Elena never reacted, but she never forgot. In year 4, she was given her first independent operation. She will not speak of the details, not because she is ashamed, though perhaps she is, but because some things, once named, become permanent. She completed it. She came back. She slept for 14 hours. When she woke, she made a decision. Not to escape, not yet. To endure, to become exactly what they wanted, because the best way to one day walk out of a cage is to make the people holding the key believe you have forgotten there is a door. 7 years, she was patient, she was extraordinary, and the day they finally loosened the leash, she ran. She came back carrying everything they had given her, every skill, every method, every cold and terrible competence. She came back with all of it, aimed at one single purpose, her daughter. The name they had given her daughter was a small mercy. They had kept it. The same name Elena had chosen, standing in a hospital room, a lifetime ago. She is 10 now, 10 years old, with homework and opinions about things, and a best friend whose name Elena does not know. She rides a bicycle. She plays the piano. Elena saw the photograph. She saw it and did not react. And that moment of iron self-control cost her more than any mission ever had. She is growing up, without her mother. And now, they wanted her. This was what Elena told him, there in the apartment that smelled of coffee and solitude. This was the thing that had finally broken the calculus. Not her own freedom, she had made a kind of peace with its absence, not the years stolen from her. She had built something from those years, even if what she built was terrible. But this she could not permit. Why? Why would they want her? She's a child. Elena looked at him with an expression that contained every lesson of 7 years. She's my child. That makes her leverage. That makes her a door they can open to get to me. And what I know, what they built me to know, is worth more to certain people than you can imagine. He sat down. She watched him process it, watched the old guilt and the old love and the very specific terror of a parent rearrange themselves into something functional. Because whatever he had done, whatever choices he had made in that 48-hour window 7 years ago, he loved his daughter. Elena had never doubted that. It was, in fact, the only thing she had never doubted. They had perhaps 20 minutes, maybe less. She had been careful. She was always careful now. But organizations like the one that owned her were not slow. They would have tracked the border crossing. They would have mapped the likely destinations. They would already be moving pieces. Where is she? Right now, where is she? Safe for tonight, but tonight is all we have. He stood up, went to the window, looked out at the street below with the practiced tension of someone who had spent years looking out of windows, wondering what was outside. I thought I was protecting you, both of you. I thought if they believed you were dead. I know what you thought. No anger in it. That surprised him, she could tell. He had expected fury, had probably been rehearsing how to withstand it. But fury requires a certain kind of hope, a belief that the right words might still change something. Elena was past that. She was past most things. What she was not past was this: the 10-year-old girl with dark eyes and a stubborn chin who was, at this exact moment, asleep in a safe house 3 kilometers away, guarded by the only 2 people Elena had allowed herself to trust in 7 years. What she was not past was the future. She told him the plan in the flat, efficient language of someone who has long since stopped distinguishing between the personal and the operational. He listened. He did not argue. Another thing she had not expected. Another piece of the man she had once known, still intact beneath the years. At the door, she stopped. Does she know? About you? About any of it? A pause, long enough to feel. She knows her mother loved her enough to stay gone. That's all. That's enough for now. She left. He followed. Behind them, 3 floors below, the first of the cars they had been expecting turned slowly into the street. Some stories do not announce themselves as remarkable while they are happening. They look from the inside like survival, like one foot placed in front of the other, like a mother.
We do not promise you a clean ending. The truth does not do that. They got the girl out that night. That much is certain. The details, the route, the method, the faces of the people who helped, these remain protected, and will remain so, because the story is not over, and the people in it are still breathing. But the girl got out. She is safe. What followed for Elena was something she had not planned for, had not allowed herself to plan for, because planning for safety, for resolution, for the possibility of an ordinary Tuesday morning with coffee and no need to memorize exits, that was the kind of thinking that gets people killed in her world. Hope, weaponized against you. The first time she saw her daughter, really saw her, not in photographs, not in the second-hand details of a handler who had perhaps taken pity on her, she did not cry. She had expected to cry. She had, in the privacy of years of sleepless nights, imagined the moment many times, the embrace, the apologies, the words she would find to explain the inexplicable to a child. What actually happened was simpler and more devastating. Her daughter looked at her, long and level, and with those dark eyes that held the specific, unflinching intelligence of someone who has grown up knowing that something is missing and has spent years trying to understand the shape of it. Are you really here? 3 words, 4 syllables, the most important question Elena had ever been asked. Yes. And then, finally, the thing she had not permitted herself in 7 years. She wept. The organization that had held her did not simply disappear. Organizations like that do not disappear. They shift, they restructure, they find new ways to exert pressure on old wounds. There were months of danger after that night, of looking over shoulders, of the specific, exhausting vigilance of someone who knows exactly how pursuit is conducted because they have conducted it themselves. But something had changed. The asset they had spent 7 years building had turned, and an asset turned is a liability, not just strategically, but psychologically. Elena knew where the bodies were buried, metaphorically, occasionally otherwise. She knew the names that were not supposed to be known. She had, over 7 years, done what she was trained to do with extraordinary thoroughness, and that thoroughness now belonged to her. It was, she told him once, almost funny.
They had built the very tool that undid them. He is a complicated figure in this story, the man who buried her, who made a choice that was also undeniably a betrayal, even if it came wrapped in the language of protection. He has not asked for forgiveness. She has not offered it. That is not how people work, and they are both people, even after everything. What they have found, instead, is something less tidy and more durable than forgiveness. A shared understanding of impossible circumstances. A daughter who is their responsibility and their anchor and their daily argument for trying. The girl knows now, mostly, as much as a 10-year-old can know and as much as any child should have to hold. Her parents have told her, in the careful, measured language of people who have learned that the truth, delivered gently, is still the truth. She took it with the same level gaze. She is remarkable. She is the best thing either of them have ever done. We began this story with a burial, with dirt and grief and the careful machinery of erasure. We are ending it somewhere else. A kitchen, mourning. The smell of coffee not from a percolator this time, but a small machine on a counter in a house that does not yet feel entirely familiar, and may not for a long time, but is, unmistakably, real. A girl at a table doing homework, complaining about it, as children do, in the voice of someone who has decided that complaining about homework is a perfectly appropriate use of language. A man at the counter, not looking at the window. A woman standing in a doorway, watching both of them, learning, for the first time in 7 years, how to simply be in a room. The dead do not walk, but the living, when they choose to, when they fight for it, when they refuse with every trained and tested and unbreakable part of themselves to become only what others have made of them, the living come home. This is a true story. The names have been changed. The rest remains.